Thank you, everyone. My name is indeed Ilhan. I'll be presenting Fair Squares. The goal of Fair Squares is to build an affordable housing system, making use of Substrate. And the name represents basically the fair square meters in a house, how it's priced in, how people basically could use this further down the lane. So I'll talk about that. So who are we and what are we trying to achieve? So our goal is existing of Kazoo, Steven, Mahir, and me. Kazoo and Steven are not here, but so we met during the Asia Pacific Hackathon. And so I basically brought up this idea and they liked it, so we hacked something together, which is still very hacky. That doesn't matter. We didn't win anything, but at least we got a small team now. So our goal is to create affordable housing, meaning basically bringing down the price of living. So maybe for people in this room, that's not a problem, but there's a whole world out there for people that are struggling with this. Another goal is basically giving people ownership. So that's really the Web3 thought, right? Like, so if you basically buy something, you're the owner, you decide what you do with that piece of asset. That is the second thing that's we're trying to achieve. And at the same time, lower the barrier of investing in real estate. So until now, like I think you could enter in some funds with like, I don't know, 500 euros or 1,000 euros. But it wouldn't really give you anything. You're not really an owner. You're buying into a fund, and if that fund goes, it does bad management or whatever, like you're screwed, not the fund. So, and at the same time, we're trying to be at least somewhat of a, like creating a change in an unfair housing market. So those are our main goals. So housing, like real estate and housing on blockchain was always like one of these use cases where they said like, yeah, this is the use case we have to like pursue. So during the ICO craze, a lot of teams like gathered a lot of money with this. Eventually, no code, still angry Telegram groups. They changed their mission to basically helping other funds manage their portfolios or something like that. And also, like if you look at the academic side of this, a lot of researchers looked into basically saying that it's indeed a good use case, but there's always this but. So it's either legislation, or it's the transaction fees, or it's this whole system you would need to function basically step after step, or keeping everything in check. There is one good use case that is running on Ethereum that's called Realty. So they sell tokens of real estate. They gather the money, they buy the property, and the token holders get a return when there is a renter in. But what happens? This renter pays money to the bank that goes through the bank, that goes to Realty. Realty converts this to USDC, then has to give this back to the people that bought tokens. And then those people still have to get their funds out of the Ethereum blockchain. So why doesn't it work out? So first of all, definitely legislation. That's a big hurdle. But for now, in this presentation, we're going to act as if legislation is, like no problem. It is not, but we're going to act as if. Because you will see further down the presentation, like what we're trying to do as well. And the other part is simply, there were not enough tools in the ecosystem yet to develop this. But if you look at like some of the presentations today, you have a parachain that's really focusing on identity. One is focusing on confidentiality. The other one is doing like stable tokens. And all these building blocks coming together, they can basically make our use case work out. So affordability. Let's zoom in a bit more into the problem. So 82 million households in the EU spend more than 40% of their disposable income on their house. So this includes utilities. So yeah, this is over the limit. It should be close to 1/3. Then you have like a healthy balance of like earnings and costs, because there are like a lot of other costs besides your house that you still need to do. So some more stats: social housing waiting lists are on a record high. So if the lower part of the system is boiling, it simply works its way up. And then the third point is like that people that have money can borrow against it and can just keep the system going. The fourth point being privatization. So governments just privatize big parts of it simply because they can lobby quicker with pension funds or other investment funds. And this usually doesn't really work in the favor of the people that are supposed to pay their rent or pay for housing. So also, yeah, looking at the effects of non-affordability, so it has this, vicious circle, like, okay, you cannot pay, you have to cut somewhere. Eventually, you're cutting else from somewhere and leads to a headache, to a health issue, to stress levels, to fights. I don't know, like I don't think they're nice things to go through when you have this one life to live. So let's zooming in again on the 40%, because this is like really the target that we're focusing on. So it's not social housing. So if you have social housing, the government helps you to subsidize your house, right? But it's just for people that above that limit of getting a social house, they're on their own. So they pay 40% of their income on their house, and the remainder, what you see in the light green parts, they still have to pay for that themselves. So I think some of the things that I find important is like health, education, recreation, and culture. So if you like have to cut on these, or some people might have to move from the places that they live to, let's say you live in a city center, you work as a teacher, or you work in healthcare, and you actually have to move more further down the city, be more further away from your job or something. So let's look at some high over projections, like what Fair Squares is trying to do, and how that returns for the investor and for the renter. So we set some parameters. So we're saying that the return on investment of a house you can make is close to 5%. So this is an investor solely acting on its own. So this is not Fair Squares related. So we're saying return on rent on Fair Squares is 3%. This is actually the same thing as return on investment. We just call the return on rent. And let's say that house has a treasury, which acts like a maintenance fund, and it's 8%. So this is the treasury of the house itself. The interest on the house of the treasury, so let's imagine that this treasury of the house, it stays idle, it doesn't do anything, then why not utilize this money, right? We have this beautiful system of DeFi that you could just lend your money, and in a safe way, of course. So you don't go for the highest interest, but you go for something stable. And the average purchasing cost in the Netherlands is around 10% of the house value. So this you pay like for taxes, for the notary, etc. And let's say there are 100 investors. They each get an equal share. Usually this would not be the case, but just to make the example simple. And the average house sale price in the Netherlands for the first quarter is 428,000 euros. So we're going to compare this of the current market workings with Fair Squares. So we put them next together. On the left, you have the current market. On the right, the Fair Squares example. So the house price, the cost of buying, which is 10%, and then the Fair Squares gets its own treasury, which is 8% in this example, and for the current market, doesn't get it. So it comes to a total price of 500,000 something, and then you divide that by 100, you get a share price close to 5,000 euros. So let's say we apply the return on rent for Fair Squares. So it's 3% that investors would get annually. And the renter, that means that the renter has to pay less. So it's close to almost a change of like 30% for the renter. So that means that the investor makes like 3, but like the renter would save 29% on how much it pays for a house. So of course, like this return annually, comparing it to like, already having like almost 2 DeFi summers, 3.5% is like, who does this? But like there's a very diverse ecosystem of actors, right? Like, we're not all degens. We're not all trying to, I know, like some people might want to diversify. Some people might want to do this because of their social heart. Some people would actually think this is good enough because they're already set. So that's the financial picture. And why build this on a Substrate blockchain? That's also a good question, right? Like, why not as Realty just go for a Web2 platform and just do this over the banks? So, of course, like the transparency is like one thing that we want to achieve, right? And at the same time, being secure while being transparent. So, if you already you can show that this is working while being transparent to the people and being completely open, seeing who earns what, and what house is what value. This is like a complete different system than the current system. So that's already that would be already one win for housing. Less intermediaries, so all the financing, et cetera, would work through the blockchain, right? Like we would use stable tokens or whatever stable token that gets issued by, I know, let's say the EU in the far future. The idea is feeless transactions, so people would have to vote, people would have to sign up for documents. So the goal is not, if you're creating like affordable housing, that it becomes with a fee. Of course, public governance, like the tooling that already like Substrate gives you with the pallets being usable, like those were heavily inspired by all of the stuff that we already seen from Kusama and Polkadot. So those pallets are really important to us. So we'll definitely utilize that governance tooling in many different layers, which you will see further. And housing cooperatives are not new forms of organization, like organizational forms, but if you combine them with a governance structure, with a fund, and with like a goal where you want to become, like you have this whole new mixture, a new beast that can really unlock something. And yeah, the one thing about Fair Squares is that it's a permission blockchain, so that means a user would have to register. You need your whatever national ID, or someone would have to attest for your ID or for your identity, or for your house. But we want to still utilize the parachain functionality. So we really want to tap into, for instance, the identity of Kilt or Littentry, or use a stable token from Karura or Akala, etc. So really, the idea is not that we're trying to we just want to be very specific in what we do and just create affordable housing and have our own functionality. So these are the roles. Actually, these are like the 5 modules that you would see that you would see in the process of Fair Squares, of like really from start to end. So it starts with investing and eventually onboarding a house. Then the fund itself bids on a house, it gets finalized, and eventually it gets rented. And the people that the smaller print that you see, those are the roles that act during these phases. And these are still actors that have, they're still relevant today when you're buying a house or you're renting. When blockchain just came out, they were like, yeah, we're gonna get rid of the notary. It's like blockchain is gonna take care of it. And we actually found a place for them to play a role in, because we need traditional businesses and their reputation and their, they still have like a lot of knowledge that you could basically use. They would be paid during the process and they would have their business identity. So that's how we see it. So how does it work? I'll go into, I think 5 to 6 slides. Like the gray slides are really like the workings of Fair Squares. So it all starts with capital. So the idea is first to bring all the capital. So the birdcage is the housing fund. It was either this or a pot with golden coins. There are 2 actions that people can do. So you can deposit or withdraw during the housing fund. And your money just goes to a pot. It just stays there. What the housing fund keeps up is who you are, your account ID, how much you're depositing, and the block number you deposited in. So it gives you, some information. And there's some other stuff. You can also withdraw your funds if it's not being used. And it would also keep that up when you withdraw. So what happens with the idle capital? The same as the house treasury. You could send it over while it's not being used. And the nice thing about it is that the users that deposit their capital into the housing fund, they don't know what house they're going to buy into. So that's I think, a part that's needed because if you would give them also the part to say like, okay, yeah, I want to invest in this house, but not this one. So you really rely on the whole due diligence of the actors before this, that they have checked like a house, whether it's suitable for fair squares. And there is like, yeah, some agreement to this. So this is the housing fund. Remember the birdcage. And then you would need a house. So we need the house to be on the chain as well. So what does that, why do we need that? Why can we not make just a bid? So we're doing this so we can basically create a trail of people that are trusted, that put their reputation on chain, that are verified businesses. So let's say there's a seller. That seller also identifies itself through some form of like national ID, and it can show that it's the owner of a house. So usually it comes with a lot of data. Some countries give that you can basically draw this data and you can sign for it. Well, we've seen examples of Kilt, like with the ID sign. So all the right tooling is there. Maybe not all, but there is a seller, and let's say that person can onboard their house, and then it's up to the next stage of someone to have an opinion about this. This is the Housing Council. So the Housing Council, as I said, is heavily inspired by Kusama Polkadot governance. The Housing Council is like a publicly elected board, maybe not so much in the beginning of like when fair squares would happen, but it's like the first line of defense. So these are the people that also strive for an affordable housing market. These are the people that also see and look at a house saying like, hey, yeah, this house could be rented out. This low maintenance, the technical report looks good, the price is okay, it's in a bigger city. They look at like some characteristics you wouldn't necessarily put on chain. And this would be also like something that we would communicate to the sellers. And let's assume the Housing Council approves this house that's being listed. Then it's up to the investors to vote on this. So investors look at it from a financial side, right? Like, and they can simply say yes, no, or abstain. So if it's yes, then the house continues to the next phase. If it's no, the house gets delisted, the seller gets his deposit back. And if it's abstain, then it would go back to the Housing Council. This is a bit, this is the part, yeah, this is like the process of onboarding a house. Maybe not fully finalized, but these are like the main steps that we're trying to create. And then the housing fund, what the housing fund does is it scans the blockchain every session, and the session could be 2 to 4 hours. And it simply looks on chain, is there a house I can make a bid on? After every session, it just tries to like look for something on chain. If there is not, it just keeps doing that every session. If there is a house that's there and it has also 10% for the treasury in its fund, it would simply make a bid for it. If it doesn't have the money, it doesn't make a bid and see if it can do that again the next session. And the set of investors, if the housing fund has enough money to make a bid on a house, it starts to assemble a list of investors. And that's also done according to a specific rule set because we've been looking at like how people added their funds. So it's like first come, first serve on basis of the block number. And if a user takes a share out because they're like, okay, we don't really believe in this, you would drop in ranking, you would still stay there. And we also want to set like some, let's say we want to set some limits to what people could own as like a fractional share of a house. That would be 33% share per house. You could set limits to that. These are not defined yet, but these are still things we still have to simulate and research more. But one thing is for sure, the housing fund just tries to make a bid on a house. That's what its function to do. It tries to buy up as much as houses that are on the blockchain and they're there for sale, because there was this whole due diligence part before it that some people agreed on, yes, this would make a perfect house for affordable housing. So tenants, the same concept, right? Like you need to sign up, some deposit, some fee, and eventually if the house is like bought up, it gets a representative, and the representative is responsible for finding a tenant for that house. If it cannot find a tenant in a specific region or according to the preference of the tenant, it just does, this representative just keeps searching. And of course, like there's also like the security measures, like for a tenant, you pay a deposit that goes to the contract or to the house treasury or to a separate contract. And the tenant is also protected from changes of ownership, because if you have a fractional share of a house, and let's say you have this fractional share, like you cannot convince everybody to say like, hey, let's make the house whole again, let's sell this. So there will be a secondary market where this gets sold. And also what's maybe a nice pathway to ownership is that once a tenant is there, that it has the first option to buy shares of investors, right? Like, so you came there as a renter and you can become an owner, like you could go to full ownership. This is what we envision as like for our governance layer. So I think the base layer, which is number 3 at house level, this is really like where the investors would talk to each other. So like in terms of maintenance, improvements for the house, and also like there would be a channel between the representative and the renter. I don't think you would ideally like to bring the investors of a house and the renter together, because maybe it's still good to have some walls in between those. The second being the housing council. So this is really like protocol related improvements, so such as the return on rent parameter. So that was 3% in this example, but you know, this could change as our economic parameters in the world also change, right? Like, so this is all up for like, it's a configurable constant basically. But this is up for the housing council. They listen to the users. They see like, how can we better this affordable housing platform? And then you have the financial and protocol level. This is really about like when something is going wrong, that they can pause a specific process, allowing like new payment options or KYC, etc. And I think what's the nice part about this is like, because like we're so like, you know, like with permissioned blockchains, like I also had an allergy for it, but yesterday I was thinking like, but wait, the reporters, so these people that are like businesses, they also identify themselves. So it's also like their reputation is also on the line. It's not just the user, the investor. So like businesses as they are today, like they would also have to go through some registration form. Their like Chamber of Commerce number, like they're also accountable for what they do on chain. So I'm talking about the Node 3 real estate agents, technical experts. So if you're delivering some proof on chain, like that's your name on the line. So you better act good. Yeah, that's it. I think the Housing Council requests work from these reporters, and they basically feedback that into the chain. Yeah. So one of the things is like, also when we started this, it was really like, yeah, why don't you set up a company that's like the front of this, and then basically through that you could do some shares in terms of tokens. That's not really what we're aiming for. So we are looking into like whether it's legally viable that like really users can own a fractional part of a house. Right now not, but we're coding still if that is possible. And of course, like we're permissioned chain, so like a person would have to register, identify themselves, like really close to Polymesh. No, don't know if you guys know that. I think the secondary market I talked about, there are scenarios maybe where you would have to rejoin the fractional shares in case of like construction or something else that we cannot think of right now. So there are like some exit plans that maybe we also have to think about. We really didn't think about like situations like, for instance, the actuality of the house prices. So what you usually see with like assets on chain, if you have like, for instance, like liquid DOT, you always see like the feed refreshes every block time, fetching it through exchanges, the price, and then it's like, this is the price on chain. Not sure if with housing this is like really that important, but I think if you're using that piece of asset somewhere, it should be there, but we're not really sure like if you would have to like do a estimation of the house price every time to get the price. It should be decentralizing governance, and that's the part about like when you start, what you see with a lot of chains is like they keep it very centralized. So like usually some chains start with sudo. I think in a specifically like permissioned environment like this, you would really see that we will like release the valves like from a period from 2 to 4 years. But eventually it should happen. It should be a system that works on its by the people that contribute to it, are part of it, and not just us. So our next steps are like more research on the benefits, and we're trying to experiment with real actors. So we are in talks with municipalities and housing corporations, specifically in the Netherlands, but the idea is to make this as generic as possible. But for now, we're just focusing on one area. Definitely also trying to include other organizations that have like similar missions, like housing co-ops, and we're just trying to get as much as feedback as possible. And at the same time, we're building the node software plus the interface, so with the same team that I mentioned before, trying to build the core process because there are so many details around it. We're just looking for those 5 pillars for now. And about future deployment places, like it's also time to think about that. So for now, we're just building it as a pallet that runs as a node, but this is still in the works. And of course, we're trying to tap in the future, like for other parachains functionality, because like we just, as was mentioned during the panel, we just want to focus on the functionality that makes fair squares like affordable housing. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions.